Boom! We are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to the Nolan Hawkeye Anthony YouTube channel. I thank all of you for being here, wherever you may be, and of course, however you may be listening. Well, guys, the Iowa Hawkeyes got a crucial victory over the Washington Huskies today at home. 40-16, I believe it was. And as I said in the pregame, I might have to put a hat on. We'll see. As I said in the game preview, this game was wildly important for both teams. Every game in a football season is extremely important, and we usually don't know until the season is done which one or which few end up being those pivotal games. Usually, I would say, especially for Iowa, they're not necessarily the first three games. I would have to think about, previous seasons to really nail that down, but usually it's Big Ten play. And this was a game where both teams come in. One is 4-2. One is, I believe Iowa came into this 4-1. Iowa had just come off a shellacking to Ohio State on the road. Iowa came into this game 3-1 with the victory. They're now 4-1. Washington, because they have the extra game, they haven't hit their bye week. I think they have the bye week this upcoming week. And they had just come into this game against Washington, with a huge victory over the Michigan Wolverines by 10 points. 10 points. And this, to me, as a lifelong Iowa fan and a guy who does content and analysis of the Big Ten, specifically the Iowa Hawkeyes, for a couple of years now, specifically on YouTube, this seemed like the game that was going to be one of those 2 to 3 games that really, more like 1 to 2 games, that really determined the outcome of this season. And I said in the game preview that whoever won this game would be more on the trajectory of a 9-10 win season, and whoever lost this game would be more on the trajectory of a 8, anywhere from 7, max 9 wins season, but more like 7 to 8. I cannot overstate just how important this game was for Iowa. And so, without further ado, let's dive in to the actual game. By the way, guys, if you're not subscribed, be sure to smash the subscribe button. I've had you guys covered every step of the way, been pumping out great content for you guys. We're approaching 2,000 subs. Help a fellow playa get to 2,000 subs. No, a fellow Iowa fan. I really appreciate it. I appreciate all the support. All right, let's look at this. I'm going to read Iowa 247's excerpt here. The Hawkeyes had their backs against the wall, and that's where Kirk Ferentz is at his best. It wasn't the prettiest day ever, but Iowa did what they needed to do to secure the 40-16 win over UW. And by the way, guys, this was the first contest that they've had against each other in a long time. Washington, of course, over the tenure of Kirk Ferentz has gone through, a few coaches, to say the least. But there is not that familiarity. Washington is coming off of a program high last year, making it to the national championship game. And then, of course, their coach leaves to Alabama. And understandably so, they want to show everybody that it wasn't a fluke, and it wasn't just the head coach, although the head coach obviously seems to be decent and had a lot to do with it. but they want to make a name for themselves on their own merit. So this was an interesting game from a variety of angles. I said in the preview that this Washington and Oregon are the uh, teams that I view in a more unique way. USC and UCLA do kind of seem like Big Ten schools. They're all classic schools. Okay, they've all been around for a long time. They all have pedigree to a certain degree, and there's a reason why they entered the Big Ten. But Washington and Oregon, especially like Oregon and how they have played in recent years, just kind of have like a unique quality. Maybe it's the way that they play offense, whatever the case may be. It's just that's kind of how I view Washington. So this game was a game that I was interested in even before the season started. All right. The Hawkeyes had their backs against the wall, and that's where Kirk Ferentz is at his best. It wasn't the prettiest day ever, but Iowa did what they needed to do to secure the win, 40-16. Iowa's defense has had flashes of lapses this season, flashes of lapses. And the opening drive was another one. Washington marched down the field on 14 plays and got inside the red zone. The Hawkeyes' bend don't break motto was in full swing. After stopping the Huskies on third down, Y.A. Black, Black, got a hand up to block the 30-yard field goal attempt. Tim Lester wasted no time. He utilized a creative variety of pre-snap motion, misdirections, and counters to throw off Washington's defense. Iowa marched down the field to strike first. Kaleb Johnson capped off the 9-play drive with a 6-yard tub run. The Huskies got gutsy on their response. Will Rogers made a variety of big throws and picked up a fourth down with his legs. He found Denzel Boston on a 5-yard fade in one-on-one coverage to even things out. Iowa's defense helped turn the tide in the second quarter when defensive tackle Aaron Graves forced a Rogers fumble to give Iowa the ball inside the red zone. By the way, guys, was I right about Aaron Graves or was I right? I told you guys that I thought he was going to be a breakout guy. When you look at Iowa's roster, there's a few guys that just jump off the page and are dudes. Physically, they are imposing. They have an NFL type physique. And Aaron Graves is one of those guys. If it was possible, he was actually, in my estimation, under recruited coming out of high school, underrated coming out of high school. And I think a lot of it, and I've said this many times before, a lot of it had to do with, in my opinion, the fact that he was committed to Iowa for so long. And me analyzing the recruiting services, Iowa's recruits specifically for so long, when a guy commits to a school early in the process, it can actually hurt them as they kind of get lost in the shuffle. They kind of, get put on a shelf and they are not the most attractive prospect, and the whole recruiting process is about, oh, who's this new up and who's this hidden gem, and it kind of has this ebbs and flows where guys shoot up, they stay the same, they kind of get pushed to the side a little bit. And Aaron Graves was a guy that I think was kind of shelved a little bit, obviously not by Iowa, but by the recruiting services. And then he goes to the All-America game and has a great game, shows that he belongs physically, mentally, the whole 9 yards. And Iowa, he comes to Iowa. They move him to the defensive tackle position, which I think was a good move because he does kind of have a more burly, muscular defensive tackle physique. I believe, obviously, how talented he is. He could play on the outside, and he's more than athletic enough to do so. But that same athleticism that would allow him to do that on the outside make him a freak of nature on the inside. He stands 6'3", 6'4". I mean, he is just one of those guys that jumps off the pages. And we were seeing glimpses of it last year. He comes from a great family, a great background. I knew that this kid was going to have a breakout year, and he's well on his way to entering NFL draft contention. Honestly, guys, especially if you take into account his size, his athleticism. I mean, this is another. I mean, he in a lot of ways, just on the inside rather than the outside, is very similar to Lucas Van Ness, not in the path and the recruitment that happened for each prospect, but their time in Iowa and kind of their physical stature. And them being men amongst boys, that sort of thing. So this is not surprising. He had an excellent game today, and I commend Aaron Graves and his success thus far this year. The Huskies halted Iowa, but Drew Stevens managed to convert a 37-yard field goal. The Huskies didn't seem to have much of a problem moving the ball between the 20s, but Iowa's defense would stiffen up. Jermari Harris came up with a massive interception to shift momentum back towards the Hawks. With Kaleb Johnson running the football, a defensive line is eventually going to be worn down. And that's true. We've seen this quite a bit with the Hawkeyes this year. We saw it against Minnesota. We've seen it a few times now where Iowa's offensive line and their run game, whether it be Tim Lester mostly in his play calls, whether it be mostly the offensive line, whether it mostly be Kaleb Johnson, I think it's probably somewhere in the middle, a combination of all three. It wears on defenses. And sooner or later, the dam is broken. Much like what we saw from Ohio State towards Iowa, just, obviously it happened against us, but Iowa has done it against Minnesota. The second half, they had a huge surge forward, but this game, in my estimation, was a little bit more balanced than the Minnesota game. With Kaleb Johnson running the football, defense is going to break down. In the second half, Johnson popped a handful of big runs to carry the heavy load for the offense. Iowa's passing game is still a work in progress. I'm so tired of hearing that and reading that. But Johnson is solidifying himself as an NFL caliber running back. By the way, guys, we're going to review Cade McNamara's offensive stats here in a moment. For the first time all season, the Hawks played a complete football game. Saturday was a showcase of true complementary football, which is something that Kirk Ferentz has told the media countless times. The passing game still has a ways to go, but they have enough weapons to at least keep defenses on edge. And here were the scoring plays. Iowa was in the driver's seat the whole game. Cade McNamara threw a touchdown pass. Against the power. This was the first time in multiple years that he has against a power conference opponent. And it was a touchdown pass to Kaleb Johnson in the flat for an 18-yard touchdown catch and run. Washington scored next. Iowa scored on a field goal. Iowa seemed content running the ball and draining clock. Johnson had other thoughts. The Ohio native broke a few wimpy tackles and single-handedly got Iowa into field goal range. Stevens converted the 46-yarder as time expired. By the way, guys, people with the questions on the field goal, the thing is, the officials really do have the best look under the bar. It really makes all the difference in the world. As a football official myself, I can attest to that. I mean, there are times, depending on the angle that you have, not being under the field goal, it can seem like a kick was no good, but it's just the angle that you have, and your angle does make all the difference in the world. So, but the ball has to be completely on the inside of the pole, and the field goal is, you have to think about it as an imaginary line up in order for it to be counted as good. So I trust the officials' judgment on those. I don't think it really played a huge factor, as both teams had very close field goal attempts. Then, of course, Iowa scored again, another Drew Stevens kick. And then we had a touchdown. Johnson with a touchdown. He broke a few tackles on the line of scrimmage en route to an 8-yard touchdown. And then Iowa had and this was great to see. I've been waiting to see Dayton Howard, the project great potential prospect at the wide receiver position, 6'4" wide receiver out of the Missouri area, get a 33-yard touchdown pitch and catch from Cade McNamara. By the way, guys, um, Brennan Sullivan was so lucky his knee was down. I don't know what he was thinking. I mean, to me, it did look like it was still a pass as he tossed it, and it was a throwing motion, but you would have to look at the rule book. Number one, does the line of scrimmage play a factor? Because as a football official, you are supposed to pump this way or pump this way to designate that it's behind the line of scrimmage or in front of it, or not the line of scrimmage, in front of the quarterback or in back. Is it a backward pass or a forward pass? And then, of course, what constitutes a pass? Does it have to be this? Or does this, obviously, they count passes as underhand, whatever. So I actually think that it was a pass, and it was forward. I don't think that it was behind. So even if his knee wasn't down, I'm not sure that it would have been counted as a fumble, but I would have to see it again to give more of an analysis. So that was it. Stats of the game. Kaleb Johnson, what more can you say about the Hawkeye workhorse? He put himself among elites in Iowa football with his performance this season. Johnson has scored at least one touchdown in every game this season and was scorching the Huskies defense. He ended the game with 166 yards, 2 tubs on 21 carries, and he also caught a touchdown. So let's look at the stats for the game. Also, guys, Iowa scoring 20 points in the first half is the most that they have scored in a first half of football since the Music City Bowl a few years ago, in which they scored 21. Okay. I mean, that just shows you where this Iowa offense is at. And by the way, guys, I'm going to give my final thoughts on the game, things that stood out to me, my classic Nolan Hawkeye Anthony analysis. All right. Will Rogers had 195 yards. Cade McNamara had 108. At least he eclipsed the 100-yard mark. He had 2 touchdowns. Again, overall, I would say that this was an average to maybe slightly above average performance by Cade. And that's fine. I'm okay with that. I have never asked for Cade to be a consistently above average, good to elite quarterback. I've never asked for that. It would be nice to see Cade approaching good status and having, 1 or 2 games of 200 plus yards passing. The thing is, though, and this is part of the problem with Cade, is that he is extremely limited in his arm strength. And so even if he wasn't facing some of the struggles he was facing, you wouldn't really see Cade being a quarterback that consistently passes for 200-300 yards, because he does not push the football down the field for 40-50-yard gainers hardly at all. Okay. Think about it, guys. How many times this year have we seen Cade McNamara have 20 to 40-yard gainers on a pass? That's not, a bubble screen or something like that, or a slant that gets turned upfield. Whereas if you look at other Iowa quarterbacks, Spencer Petras, Nate Stanley, CJ Beathard, guys that could push the ball downfield. And it was a big thing that the Iowa coaching staff tried to start doing, especially after one of the down years that they had, was taking shots downfield, putting pressure on the defense to get those big chunk plays, those explosive plays. Cade McNamara, that's just never going to be the case. And I have had him pegged from day one. Cade McNamara is at his best in the short to intermediate, diming people up, dicing and diming and really being methodical. But again, at its best, he'll be 150 to a 250-yard passer, never being anything much more than that, because he just does not push the football down the field enough. Okay. Kaleb Johnson, 20. But again, I am okay with the day that he had, considering Washington's defense is what it is. I was pleasantly surprised to see the ratings of Washington's defense. So I am okay with his performance. Could it be slightly better? Yes, but I'm okay with it. I would rather see this than some of the other performances that we've seen. Kaleb, and that just shows you guys that I am willing to be fair when it comes to Cade McNamara. Okay. I am willing to be fair. Kaleb Johnson, 21 carries, 166 yards, averaging 7.9 yards a carry. Mari Moulton had a few big runs. Terrell Washington Jr. It was nice to see him be put back in the running back room. It's going to be interesting to see what position he lands on. I think he'll likely be a wide receiver, but I am concerned that he's not going to be able to get the development that he needs as he kind of bounces between the two position groups. But again, I would not be surprised if he does stick with the running back room ultimately. But I do think that he will probably be a wide receiver. But again, I mean, the guy had the second most carries of any other running back other than Kaleb Johnson. So, that's an interesting tidbit right there. Josiah Patterson had 3 carries for 10 yards. And that was that. Receiving, Dayton Howard had the big catch, 1 for 33 yards and a touchdown. Seth Anderson, 1 for 27. It was good to see Seth Anderson. I did a recent video on the transfer of Kaleb Brown, and I was asking what's going on with Seth Anderson. It's good to see him back. And I do think he has good potential. I think he's a good kid. He works hard. And he should bolster this Iowa wide receiver room. Kaleb Johnson, 3 receptions for 22 yards. He's obviously Iowa's best wide receiver target or offensive target. Luke Lachey, 2 for 20. Reese Vanderzee, 1 for 6. Xavier Wampa had a big day, 10 tackles. Jay Higgins, 11. And Aaron Graves with 2 sacks, 5 tackles. Overall, Brian Allen had a sack. Max Llewellyn had a half sack. Nice. Caden Wetchton had a big return, averaging 23.2 and averaging 37. I think it was the punt return. That was the big one. And then, of course, Drew Stevens bounced back from his miss last week against Ohio State. Drew Stevens, I made a comment last week that he is not elite, but he's very close. Okay. He is good. He's a solid kicker. He's approaching elite. He's right on the cusp. He's as close to being an elite kicker as it gets. Okay. But he's still good. He's one of the best in the Big Ten. And I'd say he's a top 20 kicker in the entire country. Okay. Elite is like top 10, top 5, 10. Reese Dakin had a huge day with an average of 58 yards. All right, guys, let's look at Cade McNamara. These are his stats. I was surprised to see this. He had a QBR last week, was one of his best QBRs against Ohio State, was a 59.3. And his passer rating was a 101.2, which is interesting. So it would rank, his passer rating would rank 4th this year, his 4th best game, but his QBR was the best. And it's not like he had a bunch of yards on the ground. I mean, he had -7 yards. So I don't know what goes into the QBR, adjusted QBR rating. I would have to see what that is. I mean, Yeah, that is very interesting to me. It says, yeah, adjusted QBR. So, and then this game was his best quarterback rating or his best passer rating all year with a 169.1. So this was his best, according to ESPN. This was his best passing day this year, even better than his 21 of 31 for 251 yards, 67.7 completion percentage for 3 touchdowns and 0 INTs. How does that make any sense, honestly? But whatever. He was 8 for 14, 57, 2 touchdowns, only took 1 sack, 169.1 rating. Maybe I can pull it up. So this is what it says for the QBR. It says ESPN's total quarterback rating, and that's not what it is for college. I don't know that it is total QBR for college, but never claimed to be perfect. But unlike other measures of QB performance, it incorporates all of quarterbacks' contributions to winning, including how he impacts the game on passes, rushes, turnovers, and penalties. Also, since QBR is built from the play level, it accounts for a team's level of success or failure on every play to provide the proper context and then allocates credit to the quarterback and his teammate to produce a clearer measure of quarterback efficiency. So that makes sense. That makes sense. Again, it's not the end all be all stat, but that makes sense. So, anyways, just to wrap this up, and then I'll give my final thoughts on Iowa's game. It says what it measures a quarterback passing efficiency considering the number of passes attempted, what it's based on 4 factors: completion percentage, yards per attempt, touchdown percentage, and interception percentage. Each factor is divided by attempts, multiplied by a coefficient, and then added together. The result is divided by 6 and multiplied by 100. The maximum possible rating is 158.3, which is considered a perfect passer rating. By the way, guys, QBR, the average is 50. So let's see if we can see the stats. If they have a QBR, I'm not sure that they do have QBR as one of the stats that they rank. They have the rating, and that's a passer rating. So, anyways, all right, guys. Here are my final thoughts for Iowa's game against Washington. This was a huge, huge victory. Iowa needed it badly. And how they won was very impressive. It might be enough, even though they got blasted, by Ohio State, it may be enough to get them back into the top 25. So, because Iowa at this point, if you look at their resume, they lost a game that they probably should have won against a ranked opponent in Iowa State, that they were leading the whole game. They beat Minnesota, who beat the 11th ranked USC. Now, personally, I don't think USC is as good as a lot of people think, but still, all we can go with is what it is. By the way, guys, Cade McNamara is ranked 103rd in passer rating in the country. I just found it. It's right here if you guys don't believe me. Wait a second. I literally just had him right here, and this is where he ranks in the Big Ten. He is, Michigan has 2 quarterbacks, and so does Northwestern on here. But he is 15th in QBR. So, and then of course, Minnesota defeated USC, as I said, and Washington defeated Michigan. And Iowa blasted both of those teams by double digits. So I think that there is a strong likelihood that they will be in the top 25 next week. We will have to see based on the scores this week and what happens in the top 25. But yeah, Iowa's defense wasn't perfect. They allowed some big plays, and this defense remains not consistently to the level that I thought that they would be, but they are improving. Iowa is getting better contributions from Xavier Wampa, and they are getting better contributions from their corners. I still don't think that they have a bona fide second corner starter. It's still down to Deshaun Lee and TJ Hall, and they're battling it out. I even saw John Nestor in there a little bit, but they're making do. This defense at the end of the day is still, I would say, good, almost elite. It's close. It's not, I wouldn't say that they are 100% unequivocally an elite defense quite yet, but they're very close. The offense is, regardless of my thoughts and regardless of what happened against Ohio State, which definitely plays a factor, they are much better than they were last year. Statistically, it's not even close. And honestly, Tim Lester, it deserves to be commended, because even if Iowa realistically had a decent amount of talent returning on the offense, and he actually took in a talented roster, and I would say that the offense is slightly better as far as talent goes from top to bottom than it was last year, he still had to make it happen. He still has to call the plays, get guys in the right spot, develop them, work it out. And being an offensive play caller is all about feel and situations. And he is, in year one, already better than Brian Ferentz was. I mean, he is already better. Brian Ferentz was lucky. It was an anomaly for him to have a season like this. There was one, maybe 2 years that Brian Ferentz had that was similar to this, and you'd be surprised if I pointed it out to you, and I have in previous videos. But I think a lot of that had to do with Ken O'Keefe being on the roster and helping him with play calls and things like that, although I don't have the evidence to prove it. Iowa's run game is way improved from what it was last year. This is probably the best running team that we've seen since Tyler Goodson's sophomore season, in which Iowa was one of the best Big Ten teams and top 20 team in the country. I think it was the Koof year, and then maybe even the year prior. It's hard to remember all these Iowa seasons. But that year with Tyler Goodson, I think maybe Mekhi Sargent was on the roster. Iowa has struggled to have that sort of running the football success, and they finally do. Okay. And this, I would say at this juncture in the season, is already superseding it. Yeah, I was right. It was the COVID year. And it was the year after too, because they won 10 games that year too. So it would be the best since those 2 years. He had 1,100 yards, but he only averaged 4.5 yards a rush. So the numbers were a little bit misleading. And then 2020, I think, was his best pound for pound year, and Iowa's best pound for pound year running the football. It is much better. Kaleb Johnson is vying for the Doak Walker Award. I think he's up there. And if the stats are comparable to the Boise State guy, I think it'll go to Kaleb Johnson by the mere fact that Kaleb Johnson plays in the Big Ten. Now, who knows if the voters will do it like that? I'm not sure that they're able to uh, have that be put into contention, but still, that is how I view it. So there's that. The passing game, yes, it is a work in progress. I don't think with Cade McNamara it will ever be a lot more than what it is. I think the best that we can hope for is Cade getting to a place where he, moving forward, where he can have, a few games of 200 to 250 yards passing. Outside of that, I don't think we're going to see much more than that. And it's merely, as I said at the beginning of the video, because he just doesn't have the arm strength. But if he is out there and his completion percentage is decent, and he can get it up to 60%, and he's getting wide receivers involved, and he's not throwing INTs, we're good. I said before the year, if he can get to 15 touchdown passes and keep his INTs between 5 and 8, I would consider this season a success for him. It won't be enough to put him in the NFL or anything like that, but for the type of quarterback that he is in year one, I would consider it a success. Okay. Everywhere else, Iowa had a really strong game. This was probably their best game from beginning to end if you look at all the phases of football. Yes, there were other halves that Iowa had that was better from one position group or another. Illinois State, maybe one of the halves offensively was the best offensive performance, although this is really close, putting up 40 points. The second half of defense against Minnesota might be up there. Yeah, if you guys look, Iowa averaged 171 yards a game in 2020 running the football. And Mekhi Sargent added 432 yards to Tyler Goodson's 762 in a shortened year in which the game against Michigan was canceled. So I was right. So that's all good. And I am still very high on this Iowa team. I don't think that they're going to meet my expectation of playing in the college football playoff, but I think that they can still come close to it and be a very, very good football team. If Iowa can find a way to continue this success and finish in the top 20 and approach 9-10 wins, I would consider this season close to a success. On a grand scheme, a success, but on a, more ground level of what the preseason expectations were and stuff like that, it'd be close to it. And that's pretty much it. This was a huge victory for Iowa. They absolutely needed this victory. They absolutely needed it. Plus, the schedule, as I alluded to last week or in the game preview for Washington, the schedule is much more difficult than preseason eyes would have indicated. And that's why I always tell you guys, don't look at the schedule. It will not be as good or as bad as you thought. Very seldom is that the case. Okay. You look at Iowa's schedule. Illinois is better than most people thought. Nebraska is better than most people thought. Wisconsin is doing good. Iowa State is doing better than people thought. Washington is doing the same, if not slightly better than people thought. Okay. The schedule, this is not one of the easiest schedules that Iowa has ever had, not by a long shot. This is actually a decently difficult schedule. So that is pretty much it, Lastly, I just want to view the Big Ten scores here. We can look at the top 25, Ohio State, Oregon coming down to the wire. Ole Miss, LSU is a good game. Iowa State is almost in the top 10. That's crazy. Kansas State 0-0. Texas beat Oklahoma. Penn State beat USC. Georgia beat Mississippi State. Alabama beat South Carolina. Clemson beat Wake Forest. Notre Dame beat Stanford. BYU beat Arizona. Missouri beat UMass. Pitt beat Cal. And Illinois squeaked out a victory over Purdue. So, we'll see. There wasn't Utah will probably move out. There's not a ton of upsets, so we'll see. uh Iowa may not move into the top 25 because of that, but they're going to be close. They're definitely going to be close after their victory over Washington. Minnesota, if they continue losing to UCLA and lose that game, it will be come on, Minnesota. It will hurt Iowa's cachet. Okay. Classic Minnesota ruining Iowa's cachet. And then Wisconsin thumped Rutgers. And then Northwestern defeated Maryland. All right, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, like, comment, share. You guys know the drill. And last but not least, DBAP, don't be a pussy willow and facts or feelings, because your feelings just don't matter. I love you guys. I'll see you guys next time. Go Hawks. Bye-bye.